And I think the name of your podcast, Bite Your Tongue, is so wonderful because you can look at it from both sides. There is a need to bite our tongue for self-restraint and self-control to express appropriately our emotion. But when it reaches a place where we're biting our tongue all the time to not hurt someone, we're doing the relationship a huge disservice, because if it's no longer built on honesty, it's not a real relationship.
Hello, everyone. I'm Denise Gorant. Welcome to Bite Your Tongue, the podcast. Thanks for joining us as we speak with experts, authors, parents, and even young adults to explore the transition from parenting our young children to building healthy relationships with our now adults, and of course, when to bite our tongues. We're so happy you're with us, so let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Bite Your Tongue, the podcast. Today, it's all about disrespect. Every one of us have seen the roll of the eyes and the exasperation when we ask too many questions, or maybe we just don't bite our tongues. Today, I'm so excited to chat with Jennifer Williams, who's the founder of Heartmanity and the Heartmanity Center, located in Bozeman, Montana. Her passion is to help people create thriving relationships. We read a blog she wrote called How to Deal with a Disrespectful Grown Child. And we thought, well, that's a topic we'd like to delve into. I don't know about you, but when I was younger, as a young adult, I was a bit of a know-it-all. And certainly in my early adult years, not as respectful as I could have been to my own parents. So why am I not surprised when I get a bit of lip from my kiddos? Well, let's find out. Welcome, Jennifer. Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit more about your journey and why helping others to build healthy relationships is so important?
Well, first of all, Denise, I just want to thank you so much for allowing me on this podcast, because it's an honor. So thank you for that.
We're glad to have you.
My journey began as a young mother and a wife, and I found myself with this immense love in my heart, but my behaviors simply didn't match. And I quickly realized how much the pain from my upbringing and the lack of healthy role models eclipsed the love I had for my growing family. And I discovered the hard way that when it comes to partnering with marriage and parenting, even business, that we play out hidden patterns of what we learned as children. And it is really simply impossible to be loving and effective without resolving and integrating childhood pain and patterns. But for me, healing wasn't enough. I lacked basic skills in life and relationship, like emotional self-control or how to resolve conflict or set healthy boundaries. So I had to start that journey from scratch. My tool belt was completely empty. So I started repeating to myself, how do I learn to live and love full out while healing in real time? And the more I did that, the more I found ways to use daily real life to not only integrate my pain, but also to love greater. And that was when Heartmanity was born. Once I discovered what was really possible, I became so passionate about helping children and families and everyone to build skills to love one another better and to honor all parts of themselves while creating first a thriving relationship with themselves. Because what I found out is that once you love yourself, love flows freely in every aspect of our lives.
And that's probably one of our biggest challenges, learning to love ourselves.
It is, yeah.
Can I ask you one question before we get started? How old were you when you made this realization or had this realization?
Oh, boy, I even remember in high school feeling like, wow, what's different about me, or why can't I get life together? I was highly popular, but I was very depressed. So then when I married, everything came to a head. I was, 24, 25? And I quickly, everything just came to the surface, and I was like, even my children would trigger me. So I realized I really needed to delve in and focus on me and loving myself so that I could love others naturally.
Well, and I guess as we get started, I'm going to ask my first question in a minute, but I guess this also is sort of a good reinforcement for our listeners who may be a little older And I think you're still able, whatever age you are, to make these kinds of changes and work on these challenges that you're talking about. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's one of the greatest hopes is that the new brain science, and that's something that I also delved into, is learning how to repattern the brain, is that the brain can repattern and rewire itself all the way up till death. We used to think it was just a hard drive that didn't change. And so we can rewire the way we interact with life. And that's so exciting to me.
But it takes work.
It does take work, it takes focus, and actually knowing how to do it. And that's what I want
Right.
my clients to do.
Exactly. All right, well, let's get started. Well, I just loved your article. I love the very beginning, and I'm just going to read it. I should have you read it, but I'm going to read it because I have some things later for you to read. But
Okay.
you say, on top of parenting being a full-time job, it costs an estimated $250,000 to raise each child to the age of 18. We dedicate ourselves to keeping our children safe and healthy for nearly 2 decades, a huge feat in this crazy world. Even when they're grown, we have heartstrings connected to them 24/7, no matter where they live or what they're doing. It really can hurt when we unexpectedly find our adult relationships with our children strained. You think to yourself, why is my grown son so mean to me? Why is my grown daughter so disrespectful? When you have disrespectful grown children, it can be so painful and so discouraging. So why do you think it happens so much, Jennifer? I mean, I've got a huge listenership on this podcast. So much of it is disconnect with their grown children. Many are estranged from their grown children. Why do you think this happens so much?
Well, I think the reasons are so plentiful. It's a combination of how we have raised our children and how they have interpreted everything we've done throughout those years, as well as the amazing influence of our culture upon our children. They've grown up with 24/7 convenience, cell phones on their hip, attached to their hip, technology that's instant, ordering from Amazon at a moment's impulse. So I don't think that the younger generations have learned the same kind of values or same desire for connection as maybe the baby boomers or the other generations have. I think that is a challenge. But I also realize in working with, oh my God, scores of people now, that article has, it gets 13,000 reads a month. So
Oh
I've
my
dealt with
goodness.
so many people reaching out for help. And it's been everything from parents trying to connect to their estranged children to wanting more time with their children. Some young adults have reached out to me saying their parents are immature and controlling. So I don't think it's a simple matter. I think there are very many reasons. And when you think about it, each individual is a private universe with each person has their own temperament, their own personality, what they value, how they think, their emotional well-being or lack thereof, their skill sets. I mean, it's a miracle that we can even communicate with one another when you think about it. And of course, our culture does not have a good model for respectful behavior. You see on the media all the time people interrupting and speaking over one another. We don't listen. And I think as a parent, we have this relationship when they're young, and we anticipate it's going to stay that connected. And then our children grow up and they have lives of their own, busy lives, social lives. They have their family to raise. Oftentimes they're thousands of miles away. And we find out differently that it's a different kind of relationship. And many parents are struggling to establish that same connection with their children that they used to have.
What are some of the key things that you say to parents of adult children when they're feeling disconnected from their kids, or they're constantly getting the rolling of the eyes and they don't feel completely respected? I mean, it seems to me there's two sides to the story. Tell us what you think.
Well, there's always two sides, and I totally agree. It's never just about one person and one person's desire to have a relationship. It is a two-sided coin all the time. But I think at the core of what the problem is that's growing is our misconception around behavior itself. So we have been taught for decades that behavior is either good or bad, appropriate or inappropriate, loving or unloving, respectful or disrespectful, right? And we've made behavior the focus rather than the person. And the fact is, there's just basic reasons when someone acts out. It's sometimes they have big emotions they don't know how to process, and it, erupts. Sometimes they have a lack of skill of being able to emotionally modulate themselves so they can express their emotions appropriately. Sometimes it's pain that just, overtakes them. There's so many different reasons, but basically it's an unmet need. So when we make the behavior the problem, we're not really getting interested or curious what's going on for that person. And therefore, we're expecting them to be a certain way and to respond respectfully. And sometimes we haven't even earned it. But in many cases, we don't get interested in why. And the young people have a lot of legitimate reasons. They won't tolerate, like in the previous generations, being disrespected or not having someone really interested in them.
Interesting.
Like I work with one man, and he is, his mother, she calls regularly, but never once asks about him. And it's lonely. And it's like, why be in relationship if I'm not nurtured and fulfilled by that relationship as well?
And yet sometimes on the other side, when the parent calls and asks too many questions, they get defensive because they don't want to talk about the tough things. So again, it can go both ways.
Absolutely. And I was just working with someone yesterday that was needing to have a more heart-to-heart conversation and wasn't doing it because she was afraid of the consequences if she did it. And I think that's what I'm hearing from many, many parents. But without honest heart-to-heart communication, how are we ever going to have a real relationship?
So how do you suggest a parent who would like to have that heart-to-heart, honest relationship with their adult child, but doesn't want to cross the line, respects that the child is an adult and has their own life? How might they begin?
Well, I think it really depends on the relationship itself. If we've had struggles all the way through the developmental years, that's going to be a different conversation than if we were really close and now we feel distant. So one of the things that we have not learned is what I call resonant communication, which means that we just don't have this template that we say. We're in response to whatever other people are feeling, including our grown children. What's going on for them, where they want to take the conversation, what their challenges are. And sometimes we don't even know what we're feeling enough to express what we're actually feeling. And so parents will ask questions as a way to engage, but what they really want to say is, oh my God, I miss you. I miss you so much. I miss our time together. I miss knowing about your life. And instead they go, how are the kids? How's the job, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not authentic. And they do that, of course. I understand every parent wants that connection, but they also don't want to take a chance on losing it or making it worse.
So we interviewed someone recently that said, and this sounds very similar, lead with emotion.
Well, I think if take that phrase, it's you have to be attuned to what you're feeling and use that in the communication.
Okay, we're going to get more into this, but I first want to talk about, because our podcast is called Bite Your Tongue, and the premise of it is the less you say, probably the better. But on the other hand, in order to build authentic relationships, you do have to speak to each other and connect. But you talk about how we should hold our adult children accountable to be loving, but also letting them know how much you care, or even how much it hurts.
Right.
Would you be willing to read this quote from your article and tell us what you mean by this?
The unconditional love quote?
Mm-hmm.
Unconditional love says, I love you no matter how you behave. Simultaneously, love holds the other person accountable, be respectful, and to be their best self.
So what do you mean by that, and how should our listeners understand that or work with that?
So we're on the same page is what is unconditional love, right? And versus conditional love. Conditional love is saying that I want this person to respond and act and behave in a certain way. And if they don't, I'm going to withdraw my love, or I'm going to be upset, or I'm going to go away, or I'm going to cut off contact. That's conditional love. Unconditional love stays connected to the person, but also requires them to come to terms with what's ever going on in themselves and the relationship, but doing so in a respectful way. So that might look like, wow, looks like you are really upset about that. Let's cool down and revisit this in a few minutes. So empathy, that's why I talk so much about empathy. Dovetail empathy and boundaries is so important. We think sometimes boundaries is just to push away toxic behavior, but boundaries are about taking care of ourselves and our relationships.
I want to talk about that a little bit more, but I want to ask one question here. You mentioned a safe zone, and we all know the song by the Mills Brothers, You Always Hurt the One You Love. How much room do we leave for this? I mean, why are we so hurtful to the ones we love? We feel like we can say whatever we want, even though it might be hurtful, but we're not going to say that to our best friend.
Well, I think it goes back to not understanding behavior, but I think where that song originated is because our family, the people who have always been there for us, are our safe zone. We know that they're not going to cut us off if we act inappropriately because we know the love. We're secure in that love. We're secure in the history of our relationship that a one-time thing is not going to make the difference, right? Where we've been trained to put smiling face forward to the world and show up and be there for everyone but ourselves. And so I think when we hurt someone we love, it's really an SOS and says, hey, I need help here. Whether it's with a autocratic boss or whether it's with a misbehaving child or I'm struggling to have a relationship with you and I don't know why. There's so many different directions a conversation can go and a relationship as well.
So what advice would you give parents of adult children when their adult children is always out of that, in that safe zone, saying what they feel, being a little bit angry? I know we need to talk more about, and we'll get to this, what's going on in their lives, what's causing them to do this. But is it the same reaction that you said earlier, wow, you sound really upset? Or do you call them to the carpet on, that was really mean and really hurts my feelings?
Well, so first of all, if I can just use the way you stated that as an example, as soon as we say you're mean or you're rude or you're doing something, we've put the responsibility on the other person rather than ourselves.
Okay.
If I say, wow, that hurt, and I have some feelings coming up, I'm unwilling to be treated that way. And this relationship is so important to me. So let me chill out a little bit, and then I want to talk to you about this behavior.
Oh, I love that.
Okay, so that's very different than you, right? And that's what we've been taught to do is blame behavior, right?
Yes.
Rather than care about the person that is trying their best. So one of the things, Denise, I found is that if you look at physical handicap, if there's somebody you see on the street that is in a full leg cast, we don't expect them to run the 50-yard dash. Just don't, right? That's just black and white. We know that's not expected. But when it comes to an emotional handicap, which when someone can't control their emotions, whether it's through anger or hurtfulness, we don't see it the same way.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I want to ask something. At the beginning, we talked about sort of why this happens so much. You talked a lot about the adult children and everything coming easily and the cell phones and Amazon deliveries and all this. But I also feels like there's a little bit of difference in the parents of adult children of this generation. Like you said, that one fella, you talk to people whose parents are very immature. Can you tell us some of those things that parents that are listening might identify that they do? That sort of, I always feel like you should look at yourself first.
I agree.
Because you have control of yourself. You don't completely have control of the other person.
Right.
So what can I do that can make this relationship stronger and not always have to bite my tongue? So I'd like to know, you talk to a lot of people. What are the kinds of things that maybe our listeners need to look inside themselves and see, what am I contributing? Not asking about the other person, some other things. Can you tell me some of those?
Oh, absolutely. So it can be anywhere from a parent making plans to visit for vacation, and the children, maybe the son or daughter and their spouse, rearrange their schedules, their work, they take off time, and then their parents cancel at the last minute. Or it can be something where the parent is offended so easily by anything that's said that they're reactive and they make the adult child wrong, or they don't allow the child to have their own needs. They say, hey, I would love to go to the lake with you, but we've already made plans to go to a concert in Denver. That's not okay. They're supposed to be number one still. And the relationship changes drastically when our kids become adults. And I think the main problem is not accepting that. accepting that this is a different kind of relationship. And then we can no longer treat them as kids. It's not our job to correct them. It's not our job to teach our values anymore. It's our job to build the relationship and create that love connection.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because once they're on their own and they have their own family, and I've said this before, we're no longer their nuclear family. We see them as our nuclear family, but they no longer see us as their nuclear family. So if your adult child says, I can't come home for Christmas, instead of throwing a fit, understand that they have other commitments as well.
Correct. Yeah, I agree that. And to your point, Denise, about that we need to focus on our own behavior. The saying out there is people don't change, right? We can't change others. That's a common phrase. But what I've seen is that though we can't change them, by our behavior being mature, loving, and respectful, and being curious, we invoke a different response. We cause that person to feel so safe and not judged, that it creates a openness and a space for them to step into differently.
Can you give some examples of that? Because I really think that's really important.
For instance, a disrespectful child, right? The adult child lashes out at a parent because they've done something. And instead of saying, how dare you talk to me that way? You say, whoa, something's going on for you that you would react that way. That's so unlike you.
What if it's not unlike them?
And then it's a different conversation. Yeah. This has become a pattern, and I wonder if we need to have a more serious conversation.
Okay, how about something that does happen a lot with almost everyone, even if they have a decent relationship with their adult children? The rolling of the eyes. And sometimes it's around technology. You're using your phone differently than they use it because they're so skilled with all this. And even if we think we're good, we're not when we're around them. Yeah. And so you do something and they roll their eyes. Don't you know how to do that? Or why would you ever use that? Are you really not composting? Or why do you always ask the weight person so many questions? The constancy of that can sometimes also feel very attacking. Nothing you do is ever quite right in their mind. How does a parent deal with that?
Well, I think, first of all, is recognizing that the child, or the adult case, is uncomfortable with that behavior. And they're having an emotional experience that's either embarrassing them, or they're feeling like, wow, I can't connect to my parent anymore because they're not tech savvy, whatever it's feeling. But what we tend to do is be offended by rolling the eyes rather than get curious. So I had an experience years ago. I was doing executive cruises and I was doing this presentation, and one of my partners was rolling her eyes. And I was up there going, okay, am I really off here? Am I just like missing the mark? And so afterwards I went up to her and I said, so was I really off because you were rolling your eyes? And she said, I was? And I said, yeah, a lot. And so she thought about it. She said, oh, I know what it was. You were so captivating, and I wanted to prepare for my presentation that was next, and so I was split.
Oh, so she was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now? Because she's doing such a good job. What do I have to say?
Yeah. So we assume, right? And so getting curious, but in a non-defensive way, is really important. And another example with rolling the eyes is when I was a young mother, I rolled my eyes, right? And my husband and my children were pointing it out. And I said, really? And it was so unconscious, I wasn't aware of it. So I said, please point it out to me next time I do it so I can check in. And for me, it was conflict too.
But so how did they say to you? Why did they say, how do you show that curiosity when they're rolling their eyes? What do you say?
You say, hey, were you aware that you were rolling your eyes just now?
Okay.
And some people are, some people aren't. Well, of course I was. That was pretty silly, But some people is unconscious behavior.
I'm loving the way you approach this. So your daughter rolls her eyes at you, or your son rolls her eyes at you, and you say, do you realize you're rolling your eyes? It sort of makes me feel bad. Can you say that?
So first of all, that's another misconception about emotions. No one can make us feel anything. So that's our own insecurity that's causing us to feel bad, right? And so
that's exactly, yes.
When we make it about the other person making us feel bad, we're going to come across blaming, no matter how nice we try to say it.
Okay.
So it's really sincerely wanting to understand. Like, what's going on for you that this is your response? And do I really embarrass you that much?
Okay.
And is there something that we can work together on for me, like my kids didn't like it because I have a high standard of, especially in a restaurant, and paying for service, paying for good food, right? And so I would continually say, hey, this is underdone, and they're like, oh God, please don't do that, And I said, no, I am doing a favor to the restaurant by requiring them to be at a higher standard rather than go away and spread that it was a horrible meal.
It's funny. This actually happened to me very recently. I was with my daughter. We were away for a few days, and we went to a very expensive restaurant with a group, way too expensive for me. And the service was terrible, and the food wasn't very good. And they brought one person's entree, and then 20 minutes later, they brought someone else's. And I didn't say anything, but when we left, I said to my daughter, I really would like to have talked to the manager about what went on. And she got very defensive with me. Why? Someone may have lost their job over that, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, if I were the owner of the restaurant, I would want to know if one of the people who ate there had a bad experience and how I might fix that. She didn't get that completely.
Right. And I think that's one of the issues that I'm finding with younger people is they're overprotecting people from a certain experience. And I think that started with when we started participation awards in grade school. You no longer had to be good, right? You had to make sure that everybody felt good about themselves. And that just isn't realistic. It doesn't celebrate our greatness when we do achieve something, because we're trying to dumb down that and make everybody feel good about themselves. And I think, again, a lot of younger people aren't equipped to know or how to deal with feedback. It's one of the things I work with continually in organizations is how to give and receive feedback in a productive and effective way. And a lot of people have a hard time receiving it, but they rarely want to give it because they're afraid of the reaction.
Yeah, that's interesting. Anyway, I dropped the conversation. I told my side and we moved forward.
But again, that might be a way for you to get more curious about why your daughter feels that way.
Yeah.
So this is what we fail to do. It's a done deal, and then we kind of forget about it. But it kind of like is a scratchy thorn in our heart. And so what I like to do with my own children, but I've also encouraged my clients to do, is follow it up and say, hey, I want to jump on that jumping off point about the restaurant situation. I really want to understand why you feel that would be hurtful, and possibly have jeopardized someone's job, and where that comes from. Like what? Let's have a conversation about that.
Oh, I just love that. And I love what you said earlier, scratches at your heart. I've never heard that term, but lots of things scratch at our hearts and continue to scratch at our hearts. And we continue to bite our tongues.
Right. And I think the name of your podcast, Bite Your Tongue, is so wonderful because you can look at it from both sides. There is a need to bite our tongue for self-restraint and self-control to express appropriately our emotions. Right?
Right.
But when it reaches a place where we're biting our tongue all the time to not hurt someone, we're doing the relationship a huge disservice, because if it's no longer built on honesty, it's not a real relationship.
I agree with that so much. And I think the whole point of the Bite Your Tongue is to stop, think, process before you speak. Right. Because when you just speak with emotion, it's going to blow up in your face, I'm sure. 90% of the time, I guess.
Absolutely. So that brings me to one of the other challenges is people haven't learned how to self-regulate, to emotionally modulate themselves. And so that's one of the reasons for a lot of disrespect, whether it's on, in the media or in our homes or with our adult children. We need to first pay attention to within ourselves.
What do you mean by emotionally modulate yourself? I mean, I understand it, but do you think this generation, or our generation, I should say, have less of a time emotionally modulating themselves? Is there something that's gone on that has allowed us to, you see so much ranting on the internet these days. Is that part of it?
I do think that gives license to not have consequences for what we say. However, I think it's a three-prong. One, there is a sense of overprotecting children from feeling their feelings. And on the same way in our society, we side with targets of bullying rather than understand the bullies and the bystanders have a role in the circumstance as well. if I don't know how to control my own emotions, how can I be expected to express them appropriately? So if I'm not able to self-soothe, which is the case of most people that I work with, they don't know. But in a parenting style of too permissive, there's too much allowed, tantrums, whining, crying all the time. They don't learn how to regulate their emotions. If a parent is authoritarian or autocratic, they don't allow for emotions. I'm working with someone right now. Their parent was like, buck up, don't feel. And if children, they get dysregulated when they can't express themselves. Feel those emotions, identify those emotions, and those feelings are there as the breadcrumbs back to our balance, they're our compass to tell us what actions to take on our own behalf and on the behalf of a relationship.
So let's talk about boundaries. You said something like, and we sort of mentioned this, but disrespect is a red flag.
Mm-hmm.
Something is needed. You say like a boundary or heart-to-heart conversation. I'm not 100% clear on what a boundary is. Is it a boundary between yourself and your adult child? Is it a boundary around yourself? Explain that and how we can work with boundaries effectively.
Well, there's several different kinds of boundaries, but if you look at boundaries as a fence, like say a yard and a property has a fence, that very clearly distinguishes whose property is whose. But in relationship and with each other, those boundaries are unclear. And so a healthy boundary is taking care of ourselves and advocating for our needs and what we'd like to see in the relationship, and doing so in a respectful way that holds other people accountable, but also gives them the information to be able to care for us better. But there's also internal boundaries. Those are the functional boundaries of being on time, not having that second piece of chocolate cake, modulating our emotions, a boundary mentally to not allow our self-talk to be brutal and critical. Those are all internal boundaries. So we have functional boundaries, we have relational boundaries, and we have internal boundaries. And those are just like the fence in a yard. So the goal is you have a fence and you have a gate that opens to let in your guests and closes, opens, closes. And the goal is to only let in the good and to close it for the negative.
How does that relate to anger in our adult children?
If I have my gate wide open all the time and allow them to just dump on me,
Got it.
that is giving consent to that behavior. But if I open it and welcome them and then they dump on me, I go, whoa, I'm going to close this now and go take care of myself because this doesn't feel good.
Okay, so I'd really like to get into the real solutions. I'd love you to read the part of your article for our listeners. I think they can all relate to this.
Okay. Often our adult children are a mirror of our collective investment in the relationship or lack thereof. Relationship health is always at risk if we do not honor, nurture, and fertilize it with love and respect. It can be a stark realization if we find that our relationship isn't as strong or healthy as we once thought, and it's not what we desire it to be either. Every parent wants to stay connected and have a great relationship with their kids no matter how old they are.
So true. And I would add to that I think almost every adult child would like to have a healthy, good relationship with their parent.
Absolutely.
Now you start giving some solutions so that parents and children can have these great relationships. You give 3 actions that parents might want to take when they have a disrespectful grown child. Let's talk through each of these. So the 3 that you list are seek to understand, repair the relationship if your child feels hurt by something you did, and set a healthy boundary for disrespect with your grown child. So let's start with seek to understand.
That seek to understand is got a multi-purpose. The first seek to understand is seeking to understand our own feelings and what's going on for us in that relationship and what we need. Without that, we can't give clear communication to our adult child. And then secondly, to seek to understand their experience, where they're coming from, what those feelings are about, and to work together to create a better way of communicating.
And how about repair the relationship if your child feels hurt by something you did?
So a lot of times I have found that parents don't even realize that they've hurt their children sometimes. Because when a child's going through the developmental years, their life depends on their parents. So it's magnified in a bigger way for children than it is for a parent during those years. So it isn't what happens to us, it's what we decide about what happens to us. And with children, they often are amazing observers, but they almost always walk away with an inaccurate conclusion. And when they do, that seldom gets corrected. And so what happens then is they continue to gather evidence to back and reinforce that belief that they're forming. And whatever we look for, we will find. Just like if you're looking for a red truck, you're going to see them all around town.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've collected a lot of data that we're unaware of unless we've been astute and helped them to draw different conclusions.
And how would we do that? What would be our steps to do that?
So, for instance, I worked with a mother one time who her daughter was just impeccable taking care of her contacts. It was amazing because this woman had all kinds of friends of their children losing their contacts, not taking care of them scratched and having
contacts. You're talking about contact lenses.
Yeah, eye contacts.
Okay, yeah. Okay, eye contacts. Okay.
Yeah, I guess there's many meanings for that word. Huh? So she complimented her daughter on it, and her daughter said, "Well, duh, of course." Okay, so her child had dismissed that compliment. Typically, a parent would walk away and not do anything with that. And so I asked her to get curious and investigate that a little bit. And she talked to her daughter, and it turned out her daughter thought it was easy and that it was no big deal. And I said, do you realize that there's all of these situations that parents have dealt with? And it's only easy because that's a strength of yours to pay attention and to take care of things. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't take that in as something really good and celebrate that about yourself. And her daughter went, "Oh, I never really thought about that, but I do. I dismiss compliments because it just comes easy to me."
Interesting. And then we've sort of touched on this, set a healthy boundary for disrespect with your grown child, but sort of just reiterate kind of what you said would be really helpful.
One of the things to remember is to start with empathy, right? To just say things like, "It sounds like you're feeling. I can't imagine what that must have felt like. Wow, you're super upset. I can see that this is really bothering you," before we set the boundary, so that it feels that the person already feels understood.
So it's before you shut the gate.
Right.
Open with empathy.
Acknowledge their experience, not make them wrong, but actually encourage them, right? That, wow, you have every right to be angry, and I'm not understanding it right now. And therefore, I'm going to just take care until we're ready to talk about this in a respectful way. So, but again, boundaries aren't intended to be mean or fierce. They're be loving and firm. And what we forget is either we're too loving and we try to please and make up for something, or we're too firm and it comes across as judgment or criticism. We want the balance. We want to be loving and firm. And to realize that we can do both, but we have to take care of us first to do that.
And that takes a lot of practice and a lot of time and a lot of introspective look into each of ourselves, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. And that's when you made comment that a lot of my writing is around empathy and boundaries, is because those are the two skills that people pay me hundreds of dollars to learn, right? I mean, it's like over and over, whether it's in a company with a leader or whether it's with a child that's 2 or whether it's between a couple, those two things are coming up continually.
So it's almost creating boundaries with empathy.
Right. Be able to have those two skills, you're already halfway there in terms of having strong relationships and healthy relationships.
Well, this has been wonderful. I think I mentioned to you, we always ask guests to give us 2 or 3 takeaways that you want our listeners to remember. Can you share those with us?
Absolutely. So I think first and foremost is to be compassionate for yourself, to show self-compassion as a parent, and realize that you did your best based on your own training, your own skills, your own emotional past, and not to beat yourself up when you find your adult relationship with your children to be a little strained, because a lot of parents tend to blame themselves and heap guilt. So first and foremost, be compassionate. Second, to realize that we are required to be emotionally intelligent when dealing in this world right now. and there's no models for it. So building those emotional intelligence skills is imperative, because if everything comes from that internal experience with ourselves to be able to build lovely relationships. And then lastly, to realize that if we wanted to learn how to build a house, we would go to school for it, or we would hire a mentor to teach us. But when it comes to emotional intelligence, we think we're just supposed to have it. Like you said, Denise, these skills take a lot of practice and a lot of maturity. And most people haven't been raised with them, haven't been taught. We don't teach them in our schools. So be patient and gentle with yourself and pursue those skills, because they will transform your life as they have mine.
Wow. This was really wonderful. And I guess I want to say thank you so much, but I also want to tell our listeners, please log on to it's heartmanity.com, right? HeartManity.com.
Correct.
There are so many blogs and posts and information that Jennifer shares. And as all of you can see from this episode, she's an expert with a lot of words and a lot of things we can learn. Jennifer, thank you so much for this time today. And I know everyone's going to just really learn a lot from this episode.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, Denise.
Great.
You're a pro in your own way.
I am. I learn a lot from this podcast. So thank you so much.
All right. Have a wonderful week.
Well, that's a wrap. So many things to think about. Remember to visit Jennifer's website at heartmanity.com. There's so much there to read and learn. Thanks again to all of you for listening. And again, please reach out to us and let us know what topics you'd like us to explore. Just email us at biteyourtonguepodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget to visit our website at biteyourtonguepodcast.com and find a small way to support our efforts. Thank you again to Connie Gorant Fisher, our audio engineer. And once again, remember, sometimes you may just have to bite your tongue.